Good morning, ma'am. First of all, I would like to say sorry for the inconvenience. Sorry, ma'am. Honorable guest, Dr. Sonakshi Ruhela, respected faculty members, and our dear students. A very good morning to one and all present here. Today marks the second day of our international conference, MESKCON, and today's session is led by Dr. Sonakshi Ruhela on the topic Counseling Intervention Model for Positive Lifestyle Development in Youth Experiencing Psychological Distress. Dr. Sonakshi Ruhela holds a Harvard certification in higher education with a PhD in psychology recognized by the Ministry of Education, UAE. She is an accomplished educationalist with over 12 years of extensive experience in undergraduate and postgraduate teaching, training, mentorship, and research with students from different nationalities and ethnic backgrounds. She is also a co-supervisor for doctoral research scholars in the field of psychology and mental health. Dr. Ruhela was a pioneer in forming the Department of Psychology at Amity University, Dubai in 2016 and is currently designated as a senior lecturer and program coordinator for psychological sciences at Curtin University, Dubai. She is a community development authority, licensed psychologist with a comprehensive experience in the field of counseling, psychotherapy, behavioral lifestyle interventions, neuro-linguistic programming, and psychometric assessment. She is a recipient of the People's Choice Award for Excellence in Mental Health by the World Health Awards in 2021, the Great Indian Woman Leader category, Education Award by Golden Signatures Award in 2021, the Middle East Women Leaders Award by World Women Leadership Conference and awards in 2020, and many more awards. So we once again welcome you, ma'am, to this session. Over to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Sure that I provide as much information as I can. However, it'll be really nice if I hear some questions and feedback from all of you. It'll be really nice as well. So at this note, I think I'm going to share my screen. And if you can give me a minute, I'll go through my presentation, and in such a situation, I will not be my life. So whether it's me sitting here in UAE or you sitting there in India, any of us can actually have any sort of intervention required at any point of time in any area of our life. Whether it is personal, it is social, it is environmental, it's temperamental, or it could be professional. But it is expected that almost everybody relies on some sort of wisdom that comes from outside. So on that note, I'll tell you what exactly I did as my study and how impactful it was, and then we can pick it up from there. So, just to share something that Gutterman actually said, I loved this quote, and I thought it would be really nice to share this with you. It says, when life is a woe and hope is dumb, the world says go and the grave says come. This is exactly what happened when a particular distress converts into a disorder situation, and distress that is easily preventable is unattended and leads to or converts to a certain disorder, and then it becomes either curative in nature. So from preventive it becomes more into a curative cycle, and then most of the time this is exactly how people feel in depression. They start to feel helpless, they go on to feel worthless, and then finally they go on to feel hopeless because they've not been attended to. And hopeless is where exactly maximum number of people commit suicide. So that's how Arthur had written this particular quote, and I really enjoy it. I think it gives us a clarity of how exactly the situations unfold and you get into something. So the rationale of my study and why I did this study is because I found these couple of philosophies or constructs or psychological constructs that were floated around by people which actually fitted the bill in the 21st century. So for example, Alvin Toffler in 1970, he coined the term called future shock. Now future shock basically means when too much change happens in too short a period of time. So if I relate to a post-COVID situation, I mean, COVID changed the entire stance of how we look at things. It changed the entire way of how we perceive things and how we perceive the worldview and life in general. So, COVID brought future shock for us. And even transitions in generations. For example, all of you who are here, who are taking this education, you are very different from your parent and their generation. You're very different from even the immediate generation that's coming after you. So there is too much change that's happening in too short a period of time. And future shock was one of the reasons I picked up counseling. And I thought, when too much change happens in too short a period of time, people get confused. And confusion breeds confusion. And because that kind of a scenario starts, most of the people are, they don't have any, they find themselves like, without a direction to do something. And that's when counseling can sometimes come to your aid. Even Karl Marx, concept of alienation, where an individual actually finds themselves alienated. Now, this is something when how I apply it to the counseling principle is very simple. You could be amongst a lot of people and still feel lonely. Imagine this, apply this to your life. You could be sitting you may be having a huge family. You could be 35, 40 members in the family, all extended family stays like one. But at the same time, you have your own world where you feel a little alienated to sometimes your own family as well, or the traditional community, or the society in general. So when you have too much discrepancy in how you see something vis-a-vis your family sees something, it becomes a sort of alienation of process. It's psychological distance. What is psychological distance? Suppose I'm married. I'm not married, but suppose I'm married, and my husband thinks I have a great life with him, but I'm almost on the verge of signing a divorce. We're psychologically distanced from each other. That concept was coming too much in the society and was one of the reasons as to why it was important to talk about counseling interventions. Anomi was another concept, and Durkheim. Anybody who's interested in depression must read Durkheim, because Durkheim has spoken very highly and he's given us the 4 stages of suicide and how people go through suicide in general. So when we speak about Anomi as a concept, it was a personal feeling of a lack of social norms. And this was happening quite a lot. Like people were not following norms, or they were distressed because there were norms. There were breakdown of social bonds that were happening between individuals and the community. So they were psychologically distanced, as I shared the concept. So these were some of the important reasons. I'll also take you to another bit. Dr. Clance and Dr. Suzanne also gave the word imposter phenomenon. Most of the workplaces, the top bosses were feeling like they didn't deserve to be up there, or somebody will call out their fraud sometime in life. So at that point of time also there was a lot of discussion about imposter, about people being in stress, people being anxious, people having difficulty belonging to a workplace because they kept thinking, oh my God, somebody's going to catch my fraud sometime. So lots of these things were coming. In fact, Professor S.P. Rohila is my grandfather, and he's written a lot of books on sociology, and he was with the Jamia Millia Islamia University in Delhi. Unfortunately, he's no more. But his books, something that I found very interesting was, he mentioned, and maybe all of you, because you're youth sitting there, most of you is youth sitting there, you can look at this line that I've written here and associate with it. The view of youth as apathetic carries a sense of disappointment, a conviction that society will decay from widespread indifference and disengagement. Which basically means that today our society in general is so indifferent and so disengaged. It's become, even if we are a collectivist country, Asians are collectivist, Westerners are individualistic. So even if we are a collectivist nation, we find ourselves extremely disengaged and indifferent towards each other. If you see the number of crimes that have been happening, the number of movements that have started, the number of people who believe in Godman, these are all things where we find ourselves looking and wanting to sort of jump to hold on to something, is because there is indifference and disengagement. right? So these were some of the reasons why I wanted to study counseling interventions. I wanted to study majorly, lifestyle interventions, because I realized that a lot of people were suffering from counseling concerns. Like I said, 100% of the people in the world need counseling. So these were some of the reasons. Another thing that I wanted to share with you is why specifically I took youth as I could have taken children, I could have taken a geriatric population, but I didn't choose a pediatric and geriatric population. I looked at young adults between 18 to 35 years of age, only because of the last sentence that's given by Carl Jung here. So if you look at what Carl Jung said, and you can read his book, it's called Modern Man in Search of a Soul, and he says about a third of his cases, so 1/3 of his cases, had suffered from no clinically definable neurosis, but from the senselessness and emptiness of their lives, which he described as the general neurosis of his time. So we're talking about Carl Jung. So we're talking about 1900s. But in 2000, let's say 2024, it is so relevant that not many people are suffering from clinically definable neurosis, but they're actually they're feeling more senselessness, they have no purpose in life, they're feeling emptiness, they're feeling depression, they're feeling disconnect, they're feeling apathy, they're feeling non-empathetic. These are the things that are affecting people, and therefore they're going through an existential crisis. I'll give you this concept. In fact, existential crisis is amazing. So at one point of time, let's say I'll give you an example of India. At one point of time in 1970s and 80s in India, hypothetically, there was some woman who was sitting in Punjab going through existential crisis, because she realizes that she's 55 or 56 years of age. She knows that her kids have gone abroad. They're never going to come back to India, back to Punjab. I'm giving you just an example. The husband's retired already, and at this stage, at 55, 56 years of age, is exactly when she's sitting at her home and thinking, what is the purpose of her life? She's dedicated her entire life to cooking for the husband, cooking for the children, taking care of the children, rearing the husband, and things like that. And now she feels out of job. So in 1970s and 80s, that existential crisis that was coming to a person at 55, today it comes to a 12-year-old child. Today it comes to a 14-year-old child who actually gets up one day in the morning and thinks to themselves, what am I doing? What is the meaning of my life? Am I happy? Am I not happy? And goes through that existential crisis where they're going through some sort of, I don't know what I have to do with my life kind of phenomenon. So you can imagine from 1970s that crisis has traveled from a 55-year-old woman to today at a 12 or a 14-year-old child. So you can imagine that most of us are going to be gripped in existentialism at some point of time in our life. And it's coming much early in our generation in comparison to that. So these were some of the very prominent reasons where the need for counseling, the need for talking about counseling, psychology as a field, interventions, doing lifestyle rectifications was coming to my mind, because I've seen that most of the things that I shared with you, whether it's anomie, it's existential crisis, it is any sort of future shock, all of them were resulting in the end result was anxiety, depression, indifferent attitude towards life, attempts to suicide, general unhappiness, and phobias. Anxiety and depression being the highest. According to the global mental health crisis of 2019, at a workforce, we lose US dollar 1.3 trillion. 1.3 trillion US dollars are lost in productivity because of employee or workforce suffering from depression. That's the Mental Health Crisis 2019. You can look at the reports, it's available online. So imagine the amount of money we lose in productivity because some employees suffering from depression. So anxiety and depression were predominantly the most highest accountable mental health concerns, So at that point of time, when I was going through these things and when I found a solid basis to looking into counseling, I started to look for interventions and designing interventions also. One of the hypotheses of the hypothesis that was very important that I kept for my counseling, for my research study, was that there will be significant difference in the level of psychological distress, anxiety, depression in pre-test and post-test. So I was promoting the hypothesis that there is a positive effect counseling intervention model, and I designed a counseling intervention model. It was borrowed from the idea of Jongsma, which I can show you after I'll show you after I show you the research design. So Arthur Jongsma had given us a beautiful adolescent psychotherapy treatment planner. So my counseling intervention model was actually inspired from his model and his team's model. And I, in fact, hypothesized that this particular model is definitely going to bring some sort of relief or some sort of change into the lives of the people, and it will be great for that matter. So hypothesis, there will be difference in the pre-test and post-test scores. There will be difference. Psychological distress, depression, and anxiety in youth will be significantly lower after the counseling intervention, and naturally there will be a positive lifestyle effect, after the counseling intervention model. So just to share a brief of the research design that I had. You have seen in the introduction that I presented to you that there was extensive review of literature that was done. I looked at some of the most important psychological constructs. I was hoping that these psychological constructs give me a good base or a reason for me to, promote the idea of doing a counseling intervention model or even design. So I did an extensive review of literature. A sample selection was done. Now, because I worked in India at this point of time, and I was working at a hospital, at a renowned hospital, my sample selection was very, very specific, which I will show you in my next few slides. So I did the sample selection, then I took the pre-diagnosed cases of depression, anxiety, and distress, psychological distress. Why did I take the pre-diagnosed cases? Is because naturally, UAE is still a little more open culture where you could put in an application and you could go through a system of, getting your clients. But in India, I had to struggle through the idea of going through a psychiatrist and then being a little hesitant, then taking consent from the clients and to do these interventions and things like that. So it was a good idea to get pre-diagnosed cases of depression, anxiety, and psychological distress. This was also done to take the psychiatrists in confidence. And because they were pre-diagnosed, I was very careful in selecting the sample of clients who were mild to moderate depressed, mild to moderate anxious, mild to moderate psychological distress. Because I know moderate to severe, it will go into the zone of clinical psychologist and psychiatrist. So I wanted to stick to the counseling population. So pre-diagnosed cases were taken. The selected sample was distributed into two groups, the control group and the experimental group. Both the groups were psychologically distressed population. Like I said, they were pre-diagnosed cases, and a pre-level assessment was done. So the pre-level assessment I did on all these 60 clients was I did a Beck depression inventory to assess their depression. Sinha's comprehensive anxiety test to understand their comprehensive anxiety. I did the Kessler psychological distress scale because I wanted to understand their distress levels. It's a 10 questionnaire scale, it's a 10 question scale, so it was fairly good and impactful. And I also did a simple lifestyle indicator questionnaire because I wanted to understand the impact on the lifestyle. So after I did that, at the next stage, I basically introduced the counseling intervention program to the experimental group. I gave them the counseling intervention program. It was designed by Arthur Jongsma, and then naturally I will show you the counseling intervention program after this. Then we were able to sort of break it down into a certain pattern. Then I added a little bit of interventions also into this to make sure that it looks holistic. To the control group, for a period of 3 months, because this counseling intervention program was given for 3 months, back-to-back sessions to the experimental group. To the control group, we did nothing. I just gave them a pamphlet which had 10 tips of counseling, very generic tips of counseling, and I gave them that particular document. Counseling, and control group was only given the 10 tips of counseling. Then after 3.5 months, we again went on to do a post-level assessment. The post-level assessment was also done on the similar scales. So Beck was used, Beck's depression inventory, BDI was used, Sinha's Comprehensive Anxiety Test, Kessler's Psychological Test, K10, it's called K10, you can look for it, and Simple Lifestyle Indicator Questionnaire. These 4 were done again, the data was analyzed, and after that follow-up sessions were scheduled for the clients. This was the sample selection criteria, but before I go to the sample selection criteria, let me just give you an idea into how the counseling intervention looked. So this is how the counseling intervention looked. This is the model. I'll share the model with you. I'll tell you the mediums of the micro skills hierarchy we used. But this is how the treatment for depression. For example, if we're looking at there were 5 I took. The first I took was intimate relationships conflict. So in the counseling intervention model, every disorder or distress first had a behavioral definition, then had long-term goals, then had short-term goals, and then had the counseling intervention steps. So if you see anything, even if you pick up depression will have the behavioral definition, so that if any client comes to me and gives me a certain number of symptoms, I'm able to match those symptoms to the behavioral definition. Then I'm able to design the long-term goal for the client. Then I'm able to design the short-term goal for the client. And then eventually, I exactly know what are the counseling intervention steps that need to be done. So see, whether you're suffering from a suicide ideation, there was a particular way of going about it. Whether you're suffering from impulse control disorder, these are all the things that we saw in the clients and we started to treat them. Under anxiety, there was antisocial behavior that we put anxiety in generalized anxiety disorder if somebody's grief unresolved, if there was something, and likewise social discomfort. So if you see, this was the entire model that we looked at. Vocational, academic and social stresses were taken care into, and then we also went on to do JPMR and things like that. So this is the counseling intervention model. I just wanted to give you a glimpse of it. I'll go back to my slide now. So this was introduced to the to the experimental population, and to the control population there were only 10 tips. Now if you look at the sample selection criteria, it was very, very clear. We're looking at 18 to 35, we're looking at marital status, being married, unmarried, but what was most important was medication. If you look at medication, very specifically, we took a sample in our study with no medication for the last 5 months for either experimental or control group. Why I did that specifically is because I didn't want to have any impact of the medication. Sometimes a client does show a lot of improvement because of a particular medication impact, and I wanted to rule that out. And so I took clients who specifically had not taken any medication for the last 5 months. The duration of the symptoms. So any symptom that the client came up with, minimum 2 weeks duration should have been there for me to take that client in for therapy. So these were a couple of, you can see the psychological symptoms that I looked after were low and sad mood, depression, anxiety or confused emotions, adjustment related concerns, or sometimes we call them adjustment related disorder, feelings of alienation, loss of interest in activity. So depression was mild to moderate, anxiety mild to moderate, or distress moderate to high. In such situation, we were taking the clients. That was the sample selection criteria. The tools used, they were absolutely valid, and I have shared them already with you. So just to give you an idea on when we started to do the counseling intervention model with the experimental group, what was the concept and how did we do counseling with the experimental group? First and foremost, if you've ever gone through IV and IV skills, they always give you a very good concept. They say that whenever a client comes, they have a story. And because they've come to you as a psychologist, their stories are usually very negative. Because, nobody is happy and comes to a psychologist. Everybody is usually sad and they come to a psychologist. So, they have a story. The story is negative. You help them find the positive asset to their stories, which you basically help them find what are the strengths to their story, what is the strength to their life, what is the strength in generally, what have they accomplished in life. So you give them positive asset. You ask them to now re-story their life with positive and not with negative, and then take action. So the summary of the counseling intervention was that when a client comes to you, their life story is usually negative. Their symptomatologies is usually higher. You help them view or review their life, find out the things that they have achieved or they have done which are good, which are positive assets. Then you help the client restory their life, and then they will put the restory into action so that it becomes more smoother as a format. So the same was followed. The micro skills hierarchy was used. So these are counseling skills hierarchy. Micro skills basically means, as a counseling psychologist or even as a clinical psychologist, you should have certain skill sets that are essential for you to do therapy or counseling. So, for example, whether it is the questioning skills, or it's the reflection of feeling, reflection of meaning, empathetic confrontations. These were all skills that I'm trained into because I'm a trained psychologist. So I used these methods also along with the story-restory aspect. The process of intervention was very simple, and I've showed you already that the counseling intervention was almost the Bible that I was following. I stood by it. Every time there was anything, I would go to the behavioral definition. I'll form the short-term goal for the client. I'll form the long-term goal for the client. I'll give them counseling interventions. So that's the process I was following for both psychological distress, anxiety, and depression. I hope you guys are with me at the moment because I can't see you. So I assume that you're listening to me. And please gather your questions because it will be really nice to interact with you. If nothing, I'll take a feedback from the session as well. So when the pre-testing was done, there was some data that was collected. Then 3 months we gave them counseling interventions to the experimental group, and we untouched the control group, only gave them 10 tips on one pamphlet. Then we did post-testing. After that, the results were gathered, which were basically seen as t-test results. So if you see, this is the result for Sinha's comprehensive anxiety test score. Okay, and if you look at Sinha's comprehensive anxiety test score and you see the percentage of change in the experimental group vis-a-vis the control group, you find out that definitely experimental group showed 55.71% of change because of the use of counseling intervention model with them. Whereas control group, they only showed 5.11% of the change. This could have happened because of anything. This could have happened because they met their family members or they looked at the 10 tips, of counseling and things like that. But the experimental group, they showed excessive change, which is 55.71%. The next we did was the assessment of the Beck's depression inventory. We looked at the percentage of change. And as you can see, that clients who were suffering from depression, the experimental group who were given the treatment, they actually showed 54.30% of change, vis-a-vis the control group who showed only 3.49% of the change. Similar was the case with psychological distress. In fact, psychological distress was amazing results. Experimental group, they showed 64.15% of change after the intervention was done with them, whereas the control group only showed 1.23% of the change. So you can imagine the impact that the counseling intervention model had. All the three, whether you're looking at anxiety, depression, and distress, all three of them had excellent scores, and there was a huge gap in the percentage of change between the experimental population and the control population. This was simple lifestyle questionnaire. Again, this also showed amazing results. This was the fourth intervention or the fourth scale that was done with them. The experimental group showed a percentage of change which was 73.68, whereas the control group only showed 4.36%. So which means that the counseling intervention model, when it was applied to a distressed population, to a depressed population, to an anxious population, they basically impacted their lifestyle positively after the counseling intervention was introduced. So the results were very, very clear. Just to double check and just to make sure that there are no biases and remove the biases in general, I also did t-testing, and I found out the mean difference between experimental and control group and between pre-testing and post-testing groups also. So if you look at in the pre and post testing, if I look at the t-test between experimental and control, we found out that the experimental group showed positive, impact, showed significantly positive difference in comparison to the control group. Even when we did a pre-test between experimental and control and a post-test between experimental and control, we found out that in post-test also experimental and controlled had significant positive difference, which implies the fact that there was a considerable presence of psychological distress, depression, and anxiety in the youth between 18 to 35. I'm assuming people who are sitting there, you're mostly between these ages only, 18 to 35. So you can have any sort of distress, depression, anxiety tomorrow. Most of the people who go through this can actually refer to a counseling intervention model, and you will find a definite change as well. So our results indicated that definitely there was the presence of psychological distress, and the introduction of the counseling intervention model significantly lowers the distress, depression, and anxiety. So we found out a very positive effect of the counseling intervention model, even on the enhancement of positive lifestyle, the features of lifestyle, And the results have been excellent indicators for the use of this counseling intervention model with the Indian youth specifically, because it was conducted on the Indian youth and highlighted that there was a strong need for counseling in the country. Some of them, oh, by the way, if most of you just want to check your psychological distress levels, you can download a form called K10 Kessler Psychological Distress Scale. It's 10 questions only. Take that scale, do your own scoring, you'll find out how psychologically distressed are you. Are you distressed or you're not distressed? And if you find yourself distressed, then there is a counseling intervention that you can definitely do to help yourself. So limitations of this study basically there were two very important limitations. One was that I could not do too much follow-up with the clients. Because after it's a hospital-based study, and definitely the hospitals are very tight-lipped about sharing too much data and asking you to intervene too much. Plus, I left that clinic because I moved to UAE. So I could not do the follow-ups too much. And the second biggest limitation that I found was I could not do any gender-related data. Like I could not do whether depression, anxiety was more in men and women, or there was no equitable distribution of gender-based data in my study. This is also because naturally for me it was important to have clients at that point of time. If I start segregating them into men and women, it was a little difficult idea. So I took population 60, 60 clients who were suffering from a particular, diagnosis. I took them rather than looking at them as men and women. So that's something that I could have done, and it would have definitely enhanced my study. The future implications of the study, and I thought it was wonderful, was because my research work is now published into a book. It's available on Amazon. It's also archived at the Mohammed bin Rashid Library in UAE. And a lot of my students refer to it, because when I showed you that counseling intervention model, the implication of the study, I thought, was that a lot of novice or new counselors or psychologists who are specializing into counseling, when they were coming into the market, they didn't really know how to assess the client, how to diagnose the client. They sometimes would find themselves stuck in a situation, they didn't know what to do next. I would have students who would come to me say, ma'am, we run out of conversations with our clients. So because these things were happening, I thought that this counseling intervention model or book was a very good resource material with the novice population, with the the new psychologists, because they exactly could match the behavioral definition. They knew what short-term goal need to be made with the client. They knew what long-term goal need to be made with the client, and they knew this intervention steps as well. So it was very good that way, and it actually gained quite a lot of. It made quite a lot of noise. It gained popularity because of that. So thank you so much. That was my research work, and I will now stop presenting and sharing my screen, so that if there is any question, any thoughts, I would be happy to take that up, please.
Any questions to be asked?
Any questions, any thoughts? I always tell my students, I said, if you've listened to a conversation, you have not had thoughts, is because you were daydreaming. So if you're not daydreaming, please ask me questions.
Anyone, please.
Hello, ma'am.
Hello, how are you?
Fine, ma'am. How can we avoid depression or decrease depression?
First of all, I must tell you, I love your sari, and I think it's a very gorgeous color. And I wish I could wear some Indian wear as well. Yes, that's a very relevant question. How should we, take care of depression? First of all, depression comes because there are two very important things. Either there has been, faulty patterns of thinking. For example, I have a student, I'll tell you, he walked up to me last week and he said, "Ma'am, can I please, ma'am, could you please sit down? Please, thank you. I don't want you to be standing. Please sit down, yes. Enjoy the show." So, the student walked into me last week and he said, "Ma'am, could I please, I want to be I don't want to do group work, I want to do individual work. So could you please remove me from the group work?" And I asked him, I said, "Why don't you want to do group work? Yeah, you've got a great group, you'll support, 5 people is much better than 1 people. He said, "No, ma'am, I'm just very unlucky, I said, "What do you mean?" So he said, "Ma'am, I'm jinxed. If I will go into the group, definitely the group will fail. So I might let it be only me failing, why the group should fail. So what is this? This is a faulty thinking pattern." So I asked him, I said, "Tell me, why do you think you're jinxed?" He said, "I've had past experiences where every time I've attached myself to a group, I have failed." I said, "How many of such experiences you've had?" He said, "A couple of them." I said, "How old are you?" He said, 21 years of age. So I said, in 21 years of age, if 5 times you have failed in a group, is it equal to you being a failure? That's a good way of thinking. Most of the times our depression is because we have faulty thinking patterns, faulty belief systems, which can be rectified, which can definitely be rectified. See, ma'am, a lot of people do anticipatory anxiety. What is anticipatory anxiety? Nothing has happened but they're anxious. What if this happens? What if, I go through that situation? What if this will happen? So that what if keeps troubling them more than the actual incident. So I will give you 2 very important tips to handle this. Ma'am, if you're someone who's constantly having a thought at the back of the mind, you're constantly stressed with something. Every time you get stressed, follow the 9 to 9:30 rule. You know what is the rule? So you can follow, I'll tell you the 9 to 9:30 rule that I follow. It works for me. You can try for yourself as well. Throughout the day, I meet several parents, several clients, I meet several students, and all their queries come up to me. So sometimes, your mind is too crowded. I tell myself 9 to 9:30 rule. 9 to 9:30 rule. Every time I feel some stress coming my way, 9 to 9:30 rule. What is the rule? 8:45 or so, sit down, make your cup of coffee or tea, whatever you like. 9 o'clock you start thinking. 9:30 you stop. 9:25 put an alarm, 9:30 you stop. So what are we doing? The troubles or the things that you think throughout the day, we are containing them in half an hour. I started with 9 p.m. to 10 p.m., brought it down to 9 to 9:45 p.m., then moved it to 9 to 9:30 p.m. You can choose your time. You could do 6 to 6:30, you can do morning 6 to 7. Don't think negative throughout the day. Don't take tension throughout the day. Rather contain it in an hour. And train your mind to say, okay, this is the only hour that I'm going to think about some situation. After that, I'm not thinking. So start acting and reacting in that manner. rather than looking at, oh, full day thinking, problem and XYZ. You will find, and ma'am, it has amazing effects as well. I'll tell you, blood pressure, something that should not go above 50 in general. For the last so many years or so, you will find that for me or my colleagues who have followed this 9 to 9:30 rule, we are all at 26, under 26. Our blood pressure has never shot up. Only because we don't think through the day, we don't think negatively through the day. We only contain it in an hour or 40 minutes. So that's something that will work for you. Try. And another thing, ma'am. For example, something that is not in your control, try to leave it. So always think, whenever you have a situation, think, is it in my control? Is it not in my control? It is not in my control, I will leave. It is in my control, I will intervene. That's the rule of life. The problem happens that most of us want to think about things that are not in our control. For example, if you have to, somebody was telling me, they said, I'm very stressed. I said, what happened? She's like, my boss is not signing those papers. So I said, have you sent the papers to the boss? They said, yeah. I said, then your job is done, right? Did you follow up with the boss? They said, yes. I said, now you're not going to force the boss to sign it. The ball is in their court. So stop worrying. We worry for things that do not belong to us. So once you stop doing that, you will start feeling much better. And if you still don't feel better, I'm available on LinkedIn. Huh?
Okay, madam. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other thought? Any other question?
Any other questions?
Ma'am, I will start with an incident. Ma'am, just 2 days before, a child studying in 5th standard attempted suicide in my locality and unfortunately resulted in his death. And the reason was the rejection from the family side about going for a school tour. And many people said it is necessary to stop school tours. And actually, what is the reality? Actually, who is responsible for this case? The family or the child or schools? And how can we make mental strength in these children to handle these type of situations at a young age? That's my question.
Actually, that's a very good question. It's very unfortunate, and I must tell you that Asian population actually goes through more suicides in comparison to the Western population, which is a very sad data. Because something happened, we should stop the school tours. No, school tours are important for people's holistic development, a child's holistic development. They have to meet the external also. They cannot always be with family. Now, why somebody commits suicide? There are two reasons. One, they have the genetic vulnerability, which basically means most of you who are sitting here, not everybody will respond to a certain situation in the same manner. No, you won't. Your family history, your genetic makeup, that basically decides what are you going to do for a particular problem. Some people who are sitting here will fear exams. Some people will think it's exams only. So the attitude comes from how you have, what is the family history, genetic vulnerability. And the second thing which is very important that I call is learned helplessness. So if you look at behavior theories, you will find that a lot of children are conditioned or they are put under certain levels of stress. They are shown a certain level of social modeling. And these are the reasons why something happens. So it's not like a child, he thought that the easiest way to do this is end your life. No. He would have done several such things before to the parents. Like for example, if you don't give me this, I will run away from the house. What matters is how parents deal with that situation. If they say, go run away, we don't care. Or if they say, no, don't do this, come into pressure. It depends a lot on both the family and the child's tolerance level and the child's capacity, what have they learned, what is their conditioning. Also the child's vulnerability, because how mentally immune they are. I'll give you a very simple example, okay? I was doing a workshop at a school on women empowerment. Now all these ladies who are here, listen to this amazing thing. It was on women empowerment, this session. It was for school children. And I suddenly, after my presentation, there was somebody from the audience. They said, Dr. Sonakshi, I have a question for you. So I said, I had difficulty locating them in the crowd. This child was in class 6th, 12-and-a-half-year-old child. She took the mic and she said, I have a question for you. I said, yes, please tell me, beta. She says, ma'am, what if I don't want to be empowered? So I was obviously a little taken aback. And, the vice principal and the principal of the school were sitting with me. So I looked at them, they looked at me, and I said, darling, that is a very interesting thought. Why do you think you don't want to be empowered? And the child told me, she's 12-and-a-half years of age. She told me, actually, ma'am, my mother is a school teacher. Every time she comes back from the school, she throws her back on the sofa and she says, only if your father had a good job, I didn't have to go to work. So actually, I don't want to be empowered, ma'am. I don't want to work. So you see that 12-and-a-half to this concept. For them, she should not be empowered. Then she is going to be as troubled as her mother is, because the father does not have a good job. Do you see? So children are learning from the home. That's conditioning. That is one. The children's tolerance level is made at the home. So to help you understand this situation better, we need to train. We need to do a lot of workshops and self-awareness training with children. We have to identify, we have to equip the school teachers and the school counselors to identify if there is something wrong with the student. It's not one night somebody gets up and says, I want to commit suicide. It's a gradual process. So we need to identify, where did the child go wrong? Did the teacher not attend to the to the varied mood of the child? Did the parent not attend to the mood of the child? So there are lots of these factors we need to do. So to summarize the answer for you, 1, trainings workshops for young children are very, very important. 2, training workshops for parents are very, very important. 3, training workshops for teachers to early identify any signs and symptoms of childhood depression. Childhood anxiety is very important, or childhood distress is very important. And number 4, most important is keep a check. Keep a check, because it's not necessarily that it is somebody else's house which has problem. Sometimes our houses have problems as well. I always tell my clients, we become functional in dysfunctionality. All of your house, there must be some or the other problem that's happening. There is some other dysfunctionality that is happening. Because we're in that house for so long, we become functional in it. So that's how you have to look at. You have to basically intervene with the dysfunctionality. And for that, you have to accept it, that there is something which is wrong. And then you can work on it. Any other question, thought?
Hello, my name is Shamil, and this is something that I want to ask, which is, there are problems with children that you have told there will be problems will arise, and there are things that we can do to fix, but is there any specific method to build emotional intelligence and mental stability in children? Like, is there something that we can do to make them independent and to make them take the right decisions and to influence them from childhood itself, and so that we don't have to be overly involved in their lifestyle and they can make the correct decisions and they can see what all influences are bad for them and what all are good for them?
Can I know your name again, please?
It's Shamil, SHAMIL.
Yeah, Shamil, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
How young were you when you started to make your own decisions?
Very, very, very young.
How young? Give me an idea. 2
Let's
years,
say,
3 years?
Let's say 10 to 11 years old.
Yeah, 10 to 11 is not very, very young. But say 10 to 11 years of age.
I can't remember anything before that.
Before that, okay. Now, 10 to 11 years of age, when you were making your decisions, were your decisions influenced by the family?
Let's say no. No, they were not.
Let's say no or yes or
It's no. They were
no,
not-
right? So, have you ever felt that because they were not, they were not influenced by the family, you have been much more happier?
How can I decide that I've been happier or not? I'm happy with myself, but I can't say if my younger self was happy or not. But I was sad. When I was a child, I was sad that I didn't have any influence from my parents and I had to take everything upon myself, if it's bad for me or if it's good for me. And I learned it through the hard way that everything was not good. Something that I make, some decisions that I make is very bad and it's going to influence you in a very bad way and it's going to lead to very bad results.
Exactly the same thing happens to children today. So, for building emotional intelligence, see, today at this age, you can look at, oh, that time this is what happened to me, right? We need to lessen the gap and make that in the child today to be able to understand that, oh, this is the immediate effect of their choices. What I'm trying to tell you is emotional intelligence is what? It is rationalizing through your emotions. That is emotional intelligence. That you are able to provide yourself that bandwidth to understand that I'm being irrationally emotional at this point. It's not required. I can think about this situation also. So how do you help a child rationalize emotions? Two very important ways. One, delayed gratification. It is a condition that a parent can instill in the child. What happens these days? You see, I'm sitting with my friends. Hypothetically, my friends have children. When I sit with them, even for 30 seconds, if my friend is troubled because her child is troubling her, what does she do? She immediately opens a mobile phone, give it to the child. Oh, you take care of it, yeah? Don't trouble me. Just take care of the phone. So most of the time, you see, we immediately gratify the need of the child. We immediately gratify the need of the child. So the child never understands that if their need is not gratified immediately, or if there is a delay which comes, how do they manage their emotions? So what do they start to do? I'll give you a classic example. I have a friend, she's very close to me. Her daughter is 4 years of age. If she and I are talking, my friend and I are talking, she prefers to give a mobile phone and iPad to the child so the child doesn't disturb me. So the next time, or disturb our conversation. The next time, she's bored out of the iPad, she'll quickly switch on the TV. When she's bored out of the TV, she'll quickly call the nanny, go take her outside to play. When that happens, she'll quickly start feeding. So she just wants to buy time by immediately gratifying the need of the child. So child is not able to understand whether the child is impulsive. The child wants immediate things and it comes to them. Impulsive is a reactivity. Okay, so if you want to build emotional intelligence in people, you have to tell them, listen, being reactive too quickly is wrong. You have to be responding, not reacting. And responding happens when there is delayed gratification. Reactivity happens when there is immediate gratification. So the more you, sometimes I will use the word, you might not like it, but deprive the child of something, the more they learn to manage their emotions. But today, the world is where everybody calls their children boss babies. Right? They say, oh, my child is a boss baby. Right? Or my child is... So they're fulfilling the needs too quickly. So what I'm trying to tell you is that it's very important that from childhood, we do as parents, if you're a psychologist, you do training for parents to tell the parents that you are responsible for building the impulsivity in your child. So they react very quickly. That's one. So don't build the impulsivity in the child, delay their gratification, tell them it's better to respond to a situation after they have thought about it than to quickly react to a situation. That's one. Number 2 is social modeling. Something that I work very closely with parents is, I tell them, please look at your social modeling model. Okay, how is your child looking at things? If there is a parent or there is an extended family that lives with you, suppose they are very short-tempered, you can see the child becoming very short-tempered as well, because they're learning from that. So if you want to build emotional intelligence in your child, start by actually building emotional intelligence in the parent. And you can see that there is a definite thing. For example, Shamil, you see your anger or your emotions. Is it gone on your mother? Is it gone on your father? Is it gone on your aunt? Is it gone on your grandparent, your granduncle? There's something that you would have observed from your environment which has made you as a certain emotionally intelligent man. So social modeling, role modeling is also a very important phenomenon that we can utilize to help people build that, if I may say so.
That makes very much sense, and there's also something that I want to ask, that is, like, if I does this but still there are things that can influence. For example, I may not be available, and for example at the schools and all, and how do I make my child at a very young age think that what I'm seeing at the school is not right, what I'm seeing at the some things that I'm seeing at the school is good, some things that I'm seeing is not good. And nowadays the media and everything and things are not very appropriate for children, and for example the availability of social media is also not very good for the children. And these are the questions that I want to ask, because I'm very concerned about when I become a father, and I want to be something as much as perfect for my child, and I want her to be or him to be very intelligent and not be influenced by all these bad things and not go on the wrong path. Because as in my childhood I have made a lot of wrong decisions, and I don't want my child to repeat that. So how do I take care of my child through this?
So first of all, never do fear parenting. Don't fear the idea that I don't want my child to do wrong things. Okay, because your fear will make you more possessive about your child. Okay, so address that. That's one. Number 2 is, see, social media. That is something that's not going anywhere. So if I fear that my child will be impacted by social media, it's almost like I fear that there is some virus in the air. Whether you like it or you don't like it, your child will absorb it. So let's not fear about that. What we cannot intervene, we should not intervene. If you want a genuine answer from me, I'll give you a genuine answer. The better your communication with your child, the better your child will learn. Let them learn from anything, any source. But create that bandwidth that your child comes back to you and speaks to you. I will give you an example, Shamil. In my previous university, when COVID was hit, I went on the rounds to see if there is no student, because the students and nobody was allowed on campus. But you could still see from the camera that there are some students who are sitting somewhere. So I went to the student, I asked them, I said, Beta, what are you doing here? You know the COVID protocol, yeah? You have to go to your house. Please, go home, be safe. You know what the student said to me? He said, Ma'am, are you sure my home is safe for me? I feel more safety in the college. Can you please let me be in college, ma'am? I'm not disturbing anybody. Can I please stay in the classroom? Ma'am, I will not do anything. I'll leave at 6:30, ma'am. My home is not safe for me. You see? So naturally I called the child for counseling and I asked him, I said, what's happening? He said, no, ma'am, my parents judge me. All the time. Everything I do. So it feels like it's like they have a spotlight over my head all the time. I don't want to go home. 6:30, my father will come back home. My mother and they will go for a walk. In the meantime, I will immediately go to my room. I'll sit there. They'll have their dinner and sleep by 9:30. Then I'll feel okay. So please let me sit in the college. I don't want to go home. So what can you do about these situations? You can always see that if the parents created that kind of bandwidth, that the child and the parent could have communication. I'm not saying parents are wrong. They also don't know parenting. Some of them are new parents. So they don't know how to do parenting as well. But The biggest problem is communication. The biggest problem is that there are no boundary settings also. That, even now, Shamil, there are so many of the people who are sitting in the hall at the moment who speak to their fathers via their mothers. They don't speak to the mothers directly. So, communication channel, the better the communication channel, Shamil, the better you will raise the child. Even today, I'm 37 years of age. Every single time, my parents are excellent parents. Every single time I have a problem, they have given me the bandwidth to speak to them. Any discussion, whether it's my father or my mother specifically, but everything is on the table discussion. Whether it is something which is distasteful, whether it is tasteful, they have always listened to me. And that's how, if you see my body language, my personality, my growth, my success is comparatively much higher than my peers. Only because they have given me that open kind of communication pattern. So invest in your communication style. Invest in attending skills, listening skills, and you will see a better relationship with your children.
Thank you ma'am for answering my questions, and I would like to elongate because our time is limited. Thank you. I'll connect you on LinkedIn.
Shamil, we can always get in touch. All of you who are sitting there, I have never seen Famita. Is Famita there in the crowd?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Famita. Thank you so much for reaching out to me. We have always, exchanged WhatsApp messages and LinkedIn messages. So it's lovely to see you in person. Your display picture also is not your picture, so I did not really understand who it was. But Femita has my details. So anybody, if you have any question and thought, you could either add me on LinkedIn or you could WhatsApp it to me, and I would be more than happy to attend to it.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Gratitude for this insightful and beneficial session highlighted the paramount importance of mental health, underscoring that both mental and physical health constitute the real wealth of an individual, thereby emphasizing that nothing merits greater importance than the preservation of our own mental well-being. Next, I heartily invite Femida, Conference Coordinator, Assistant Professor, Department of Psychology, MES Kalladi College, Mannarkkad, to deliver vote of thanks.
On behalf of MESKCON International Conference 2024, I extend my gratitude to each one of you for your valuable and active participation in this session. Our sincere appreciation goes to our esteemed speaker, Dr. Sonashi Ruhela, for the information sharing about the counseling intervention model. I extend my sincere gratitude to our principal, Dr. Rajesh, and conference coordinator, Mustafa, for their support and guidance throughout the conference. I extend my thanks to the organizing committee and our department, and especially thanks to our HOD, Ms. Rasha Fatima. Thank you so much, ma'am.